I was peacefully sleeping alongside my husband when I was rudely awakened by 4 witches whom just barged into my small home and then into my room. They took a hold on me and would not let me go. I screamed and yelled at the top of my lungs for my husband to help, but he would not awaken. He did not hear my screams. It was as if he was under a spell these atrocious witches had casted upon the love of my life. With no other alternative, I fought for myself. I kicked and punched. I struggled to get out of the grasps of these witches, but they were too powerful. 4 against 1 is not fair, but whoever said witches were fair, whoever said life was fair. Besides powerful, these witches were also frightening. They were terrifying to look at. They had black eyes that pierced into my soul. They wore a black cloak to mask their bodies, and they reeked of evil. I did not know what they wanted from me. All I knew was that I had to follow them if I wanted to spare my life. I stopped struggling, and they dragged me out of the house as I was. I did not know where the final destination was. All I knew was that they were headed towards the woods. My poor aching feet bled at every step I took. The sticks and stones wounded my feet and legs. The cold wrath of the wind froze my delicate, sensitive skin. After an endless amount of walking, they finally stopped. Just ahead of us was a crowd of figures wearing black cloaks as well. More witches. We joined the rest of the group and they formed a circle, then carelessly shoved me in the middle. Afterwards, they started lighting up torches. I had no idea what the intentions of these evil witches were. Everything around me was dark and cold. All I saw were endless trees and endless witches. I thought the situation couldn't get any more frightening. But I was wrong. Another witch came with a sack. A big, bulky sack that seemed to be dripping of something, with a scent so horrible I could hardly breathe. She stood in front of one witch and pulled something out of the sack. An animal's head. She placed the animal's head over and on the witch's head. She did the same with the witch next to her, and the next, until they all had an animal's head bleeding over their own. Cows, pigs, sheep. There was a whole farm. It was a nightmare, a living nightmare. Then they started chanting in an unknown language to me. Without any comprehension of what they were saying, I just sat there. I shivered out of cold and shivered out of fear. My hands were trembling and the hairs in my arms were raised. I was covered in dirt and mud, with holes in my nightgown from being shoved and pushed into the woods. They all chanted in unison, as if they were robots. But they were not robots, they were witches. They started pouring potions and herbs into a big boiling pot. Lizards, frogs, and rat tails also went into the pot. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw someone different. They were dressed in regular clothing and not wearing a cloak like the people surrounding me. But they seemed frightened, and they looked surprised and stunned, with their jaw dropped from astonishment and pupils dilated from disbelief. Although they were frightened, they were hope for me. It was another person, not a wretched witch. Just the very sight of them brings comfort and relief to me. Maybe they have come to save me. Maybe I won't die today after all, I thought. I waited for her to make a move, to interrupt the ritual and help me, but she stood still, watching. Suddenly, she made a deadly move. She lost her balance and fell over in a pile of rocks. The pile disassembled and made a rough sound. As the rocks fell apart, so did my hopes of ever getting out of here alive. She bit her lip and made a fist, knowing she had been caught. The witches stopped the ritual, but didn't lose sight of me. 2 witches held me down to make sure I didn't try to escape. Another 3 went after the woman who had been spying on them. The witches got a hold of her and tied her up against something with a wire. They tied the wire around her so tight it started slicing through her skin, and in no time there was a pool of blood at her feet. At this point, I felt a small sense of happiness. Happy because finally they were not so much worried about me. Happy because I was not being the one tortured. Although slicing her skin wasn't enough, they took small branches off of a tree and stabbed her in the eyes with them, as if that would make her unseen, what she saw here tonight. I was hoping they'd keep going and forget about me. But they soon ended it. One of the witches grabbed her torch and set the poor, helpless woman on fire. She screamed in utter pain and agony. She struggled to break free, but the more she struggled, the more the wire sliced through her skin. In an instant, she was gone. When they were done with her, they brought their focus back to me. They continued chanting, and suddenly, they stopped. 2 witches approached me. One of the witches was wearing a red cloak. They approached me with a book in their hands, a book so thick and heavy it took the both of them to carry it. The book also looked old as if it had been hiding out for centuries. The wind carried the dust laid upon it. As the dust cleared away, I could see a title. The title read, Devil's Book, Confederate Witches. At this point, I had figured out what they were doing all along. They wanted me to join them and be a part of the Confederate Witches. They had recruited me. The witch with the red cloak and her assistant held the open book. Then a witch comes to me on my right, nearly frightening me. She hands me a knife and tells me to make a slight cut on my wrist. At first, I resisted, but then she said that if I didn't cut my wrist, she would cut my throat. I did just as they asked me to. After the cut, they asked me to hold my hand over their book and to let my blood drip onto the open pages. I did just that. As my innocent blood tainted the pages of this evil book, the leaves started rustling, the wind started picking up, and the branches on the trees started fighting, swaying back and forth. Everything around me spun and got eaten up by the fierce wind, nature fighting against each other and the ravens circling around and screeching. Suddenly, everything stopped, and the woods stood still, silent. After a long calmness, I felt something inside me. I felt strength, power, and adrenaline rushing through my veins. I liked the feeling. I never felt so alive. I have become a witch. All night, I thought these witches were making me suffer through a nightmare, but all along they were giving me a dream, a new way of life, a better way of life. Being a witch, being the devil's server, can change my life for the better, and now I have the power. With this kind of power, I can do anything my heart desires.